Now, it isn't exactly a secret that Ubisoft is the master of downgrades. It's pretty common knowledge that Ubisoft tends to kind of like enhance their games a little bit for initial reveal trailers, and then over time when the game comes out, people usually find out that the game doesn't actually look anywhere near as good as advertised. And I think the most obvious and common example is probably with the first Watch Dogs game. When it first got unveiled in 2012, it absolutely looked incredible. Like, this was before the 8th console generation was even out, and it looked absolutely phenomenal. And when the game eventually did come out, it didn't look anywhere near as good. Now, I do think Watch Dogs still looked just fine, if I'm being completely honest, and I think these days you can get it to sort of look like its initial reveal using mods on PC. But yeah, this is just kind of like a common Ubisoft thing. They've done this for years. But today I want to talk about something that I think puts this to another level, because there is actually one game that Ubisoft didn't just downgrade after launch, but actually downgraded further as time went on. And the game, as some of you might expect that I'm talking about, is The Crew game. Now, The Crew received two major expansions over its time, both called Wild Run and Calling All Units. And both of these pretty much downgraded the game in pretty much every conceivable way, which is extremely shocking in hindsight, because these expansions were mainly like marketed as upgrades. So these expansions came with graphical upgrades to the entire game, where, you know, the handling was overhauled. And interestingly enough, people generally thought that these were an actual improvement. So under old videos where people actually compared the original look of the game with the new look that the update introduced, you can actually often find comments straight up saying, like, it's not often that a developer completely revamps the graphics of a game without making us pay $60 for a second game. Well done, Ivory Tower, it looks absolutely fantastic. And here's another one, the only Ubisoft game to get a graphical upgrade. It literally looks like one of those PS3 to PS4 videos. Wild Run is everything The Crew should have been at launch. DLC with better graphics, haven't we come too far? Which is absolutely crazy to me, because even in this video, in this short like comparison video, you can tell that the graphics and the game overall just looks way worse. So here we have what the original game looked like, which I think should be like somewhere near the Grand Canyon, or is at least somewhere in the, you know, wider canyon area. And what look, it looks fine. And then, what is this? Why does it look like this? Why is it so green? Why is it so desaturated? What happened to the colors of the car? Why does it look like that? And here's another comparison from the interior view of the car. Pay actual attention to the material of the dashboard. Like, you can actually see the metal and the individual metal textures here, and like the shine around the wheel. What happened? Why is it gold? Why is the steering wheel now matte? What happened here? Even the nighttime looks significantly worse. So once again, here we have the original game, and pay close attention to like how there's like some lights in the distance, like where the trees are here. You can see that there's like some kind of like, this is what's called light pollution, right? And everything just has this like glow to it, like the buildings here, for example, right? And then when we go to Wild Run, pretty much all of that is gone. You see this? You see what I'm talking about? It feels like the life, you know, just kind of got sucked out in some kind of like weird way. And here's a comparison where you can actually see all of it together. Like, once again, pay attention to the material of the dashboard, the shine around the wheel, the light pollution in the background, the glow of the buildings. And once we switch to the Wild Run update, all of that is gone. Like, it just looks so much weirder. Now, you might prefer this look overall. I'm not like trying to speak from an aesthetic point of view. You might prefer the way this looks like visually. But on a purely graphical standpoint, if we're talking like graphical effects and details that you're actually able to visibly see, this is just a straight downgrade. And so it is unbelievable to me to now go back to this video and read comments like this, where people are saying, can't believe how much better the game looks and sounds now. It's crazy. But this is what a general belief is with this update. Like, people generally believe that this was a general graphical upgrade that was delivered for free with this game, mind you, as well. But along with that, there have also been some handling and physics changes. I wanted to say improvements, but they're not improvements, as we're gonna see. And generally, people really like the Wild Run update. This is where like the game really turned around for a lot of people. I'm gonna go into a bit more of the details here. I didn't mean to just like show you these comparison videos. We're gonna actually go into like some of the finer details that have been like discovered when comparing these two versions back to back, that really just highlight how much worse the game really did become. So I want to give a big shout out to the Crew Unlimited Discord server, in particular Whammy, who's going to provide a lot of the information we're going to see in this video. There is an entire channel called Wild Run Atrocities that is dedicated to documenting every single thing in this update that got worse. And this is a long list. We're gonna be here for a while. I'm gonna condense all of this down, all the contents in this channel down to just the highlights, the stuff that I think is like the most blatant and most absurd. But I highly encourage you to actually have a read through this channel yourself, as I will absolutely not be able to cover everything. So if you want to know more, you can find a link to the Discord server in the description below, and you can check out this channel for yourself if you want to. So the main thing to know about why the game looks so much different now with the Wild Run update is that they basically introduced a new rendering technique, a new rendering pipeline called PBR. And this has a drastic effect on the game's visuals. Now, whether or not this looks better or worse kind of depends, but what matters here is that the game was absolutely not built with this in mind, and this is going to become very relevant later. But the main thing of note is that pretty much every single scenery looks completely different now. So here once again we have a screenshot from the original release, which I gotta say looks absolutely fantastic. This looks like concept art. This looks beautiful. You can see all of the detail on the road here and how the road just kind of like reflects the sunlight properly. Like, it looks great. And then here we have the game with the Wild Run update, and as I already pointed out, for whatever reason, the game is almost always green. Like, something happened with the entire, like, color scheme of the game that just makes it look really ugly. Like, the entire, like, color is just completely gone. And all the details we saw on the road are completely missing now, which is also due to something else. But I think this kind of, like, highlights the difference in rendering techniques and how you can't just, like, switch mid, you know, while the game is already out. While this is the reason why it's usually a bad idea. And here we can see an interior shot of a car. Once again, this is before the Wild Run update. And I've already pointed this out during the video, how you can actually like see all of the details, how the steering wheel just kind of like shines, so that, you know, you can really like see the material come through with this. And here's how it looks after the Wild Run update. It's completely pitch black. You can't actually see anything. So I do think the details and the materials are still there. It's just that with this new render pipeline, it's pretty much invisible at this point. Here's a more direct comparison, and, you know, I pointed this out earlier, like, pretty much all the materials on the interior of the car have gotten a complete downgrade. Like, it just doesn't really reflect the environment all that much anymore. And at times the colors are also completely off, as you can see with the dashboard here. Now, one additional problem is that this game used to have what's called atmospheric fog. So as you can see here in the original screenshot of the game, you can see that stuff in the distance has this fade over it, this distant fog basically. So the mountains kind of like blend together with the sky a little bit. This is how things actually look in real life, by the way, if you've ever been outside. And this distant fog has been completely removed in the Wild Run update, which is a problem because the background was kind of built with this atmospheric fog in mind. So now that it's gone, you can actually see how poorly detailed these mountains look, and you can see that the exact line where the trees actually stop being rendered at all. Which, you know, with the atmospheric fog you don't see. Like, this actually just looks fine. It looks normal, right? Like, the atmospheric fog is there for a reason, and it's to hide the lower levels of detail, you know, that you usually shouldn't be able to see further in the distance. And these lower detailed models and, you know, the reduction in details here in general, in fidelity, it just becomes extremely obvious when you remove the distant fog, which is why you should never ever remove it. This is the exact problem that the GTA Definitive Edition had when it launched as well, because, you know, with GTA San Andreas in particular, the distant fog actually helped to keep up the immersion that the map is actually way bigger than it really is. But when you remove it, you know, you can see how small the map is, and you can actually, like, look over the entire map, which was absolutely not intended. And this becomes most obvious if you are at some kind of, like, higher up point on the map, like on some like super tall mountain. You can see how absolutely low detail the city is here with the roads. You can see the river here. This looks like a, you know, JPEG almost. Like, it just looks terrible. Same again here where you are on some kind of like higher up highway, and you can see that everything in the distance is completely ugly. And once again, you wouldn't ever see this in the original game. And before anyone gets confused, yes, this here is still screenshots from the Wild Run update. You might notice that the HUD here is actually from the original release, but since the rest here, like for example, the finish in the top 3 text and everything else, does actually match the Wild Run HUD, I assume this was just a mod here. This is definitely still Wild Run. Snowy areas in the original game had a very, very distinct atmosphere as well, with a lot of extra fog that got added, and I think also like very different shading with the sun looking slightly different, and also unique roads, which we're gonna see a little bit more later on. But the snow areas in this game used to have a very, very particular look that just got completely like taken away. Like this area looks like any other area in the game, was it not for like the snow and the specific trees here. Which is a problem once you go off-road. This just looks really awkward, and if you compare it to the original game, yeah, this is obviously a lot more atmospheric. This is kind of what the, developers actually intended the snowy areas to look like. And also, a fun little bonus, where'd the headlights go? Yeah, I don't know either. This also affects the cutscenes where you can actually at times not even see anything anymore. So, this is one of the earlier cutscenes where you enter one of the street races in the very beginning. And these used to have like a very like particular look to them. Like it almost reminds me a little bit of Blur. How everything was like, had this like bluish tint, and there was actually like a surprising amount of light still there, which is now completely gone with Wild Run. You can see this again here, and fun little bonus, by the way, that is that these lights, cones here, that are being casted from these like machines here, from these lamps, is completely gone. However, in Wild Run, they still kept up these like what I assume to be like maybe like static lights here that are casted on top. So this is just completely broken here. Like it just looks awful. Windshields in the Wild Run are also completely broken. Like you can see that this doesn't really work. I'm not even sure what exactly broke here and why it looks the way it does, but you can see that the sun is kind of like shining through the roof here, and something about the windshield does not look right. It just looks completely broken. Now, one important thing to note about the original The Crew is that each and every area, each major city, each bigger district had a very, very distinct look to it. So they actually had specific types of weather, specific types of lighting, specific types of colors for each of the areas in the game to really ensure that every area looks unique. And with the Wild Run, they basically just applied the same look and the same types of weather to every single part of the map. So for example, for the Midwest, you had Midwest sunny, Midwest cloudy, Midwest stormy, and then you had specific weathers for certain cities like St. Louis stormy or Chicago cloudy and windy. Then you had different weathers for the East Coast, different weathers for the South, different weathers for the mountain states, different weathers for the West. And as you can see here, it just makes the game look completely different whenever you are somewhere else. Wild Run, like the Wild Run site here, this is how the game looks everywhere. The game always looks like this. And then you compare it to the original game where, this has a very, very distinct look to it with like more orange, more warmer colors here. And also like a very, very different looking sky. Which even affects the introduction of the game. So this is the very, very first mission. Like this is what you're getting thrown into right when you start the game. Yeah, also looks completely different. And I gotta say the original looks way, way, way more interesting. And not to mention that this looks worse overall as well, because like in the original you can clearly see the skies where for some reason the light of the sky or the sun just completely blows out everything in the distance. And this change can also affect how the cars themselves actually look. So for some reason it makes every single car in the game look pretty much like a toy car. So you can see that the details on all of the individual indentations kind of disappear on this Camaro here, as the car just becomes like really yellow and like almost oversaturated to a degree. And just kind of blends all of the details together. So for example here, like, near the front here, you can kind of see all of the individual indentations and where, how the metal just kind of like forms here, so to say. And it just kind of like blends together as like one color with the new colors here. It completely removes all of the unique details that you could actually see on this car. I think, like, obviously they're still there. It's just that with the new, rendering pipeline, it just doesn't really become as visible anymore. Like in general, the colors look extremely washed out on the Wild Run pretty much every single time we compare like one screenshot to another. Like you can see that, originally here, this was originally like during the sunset, like the sun was kind of like starting to set. We can kind of see this on the car here, which you wouldn't really be able to tell at all on the Wild Run side here. Now, one other thing to note is that each city actually had very unique road textures. So this is in Detroit, for example, and as you can see that, in the original game, Detroit had cracked sidewalks and, cracked roads. Because obviously the city, unfortunately, is a little bit more run down than other parts of the United States. And they actually implemented this and made, Detroit look more run down, but for some reason in the Wild Run, they just replaced every single road texture, every single unique texture that was unique to all of these cities with the same basic one everywhere. So this unique character that Detroit had with the cracked roads and sidewalks has now been completely removed, and you can have this super generic wet road that looks terrible and you see pretty much everywhere. Like in the original, you also had these like patches in the road, which, kind of like shook up the game's look in general. Like it made the graphics and the map look less repetitive. Yeah, for whatever reason, I guess they just fixed all of it. So this is the exact same road that you'll see in every single place in the game. So it just takes out like all of the uniqueness and the character from these maps. Wild Run also removed various ambient particle effects. So for example, here in the original, you can kind of see what seems to be like newspapers or foliage kind of blowing through the wind. You will never see this again in Wild Run. Like pretty much all of the unique, particle effects that were added to breathe a little bit more life into the map, all of that is gone. The same also goes for various light sources, which could not be any more obvious than in Las Vegas, which, obviously is like pretty much one of the brightest cities at night. And you can see that, these hotels here or buildings, they have all of these like lights around it, which just are completely gone here. And once again, I'm not sure why the headlights don't cast any light in front of you anymore. Not even on the traffic cars either. It's like all of this looks completely broken here. Now you can see, for example, here that the, hotel sign in the background isn't even lit up anymore on the Wild Run, along with pretty much everything else. Like you can see that the street lights are clearly on, but they're not actually casting any lights, which they, at this, time of day, they absolutely should. So the entire thing just looks weirdly dark, which is super weird considering we're in Las Vegas. As I already talked about, weather's basically just being copy and pasted everywhere with no regards to if it actually makes sense or not. Here you can actually see, the Death Valley basically in the game. This time, Wild Run is on the left and not on the right. So, yeah, tell me why it's pouring rain in the middle of the desert. This never happened in the original game because, as I said earlier, like there were specific weathers for each region in the game, and it was never ever supposed to rain in this area of the map. And in general, pretty much every area outside of the game also looks much worse. I mean, just look at this, dude. Like, do I even have to say anything here? Nighttime also looks way worse. So in the original, you actually had this like beautiful skybox here where you can see like a ton of stars. And also pay attention to the lights, which kind of like start to become blurry and kind of like blend into each other in the original. The skybox is completely like gone. I mean, it's not gone, but it's just like nowhere near as interesting in Wild Run. And yeah, the entire thing just looks way more generic. The mountain that you can see in the background is also not visible anymore for whatever reason. Times Square is another great example, since obviously Times Square is probably one of the most lit up areas in the entire United States at night. And you can see it's just blasting with lights absolutely everywhere. Like there's like, the entire image is basically glaring. And yeah, just doesn't really feel as alive anymore now, does it? And here are more awesome examples of like all of the unique weathers and in general atmospheres that each of the areas used to have. So for example here, in the mountain states, if you're actually high up, you can see that there's like a bunch of like ground fog that covers like pretty much like the entire city. I think this must be Las Vegas here. The Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco was kind of covered in this like really cool looking fog. The mountain states actually felt cold. The Midwest during crappy weather looks like, post-apocalypse. And meanwhile, you have Wild Run looking like this. Like this looks like Fallout New Vegas, if I'm being honest. And I think even that's pushing it. And yeah, I'm not sure why at times the game also looks like this, where it's clearly like way too dark, but there's no lights being cast. Yeah, it's just pathetic. In general, night driving in the original was actually amazing. Like, they actually made it so that the game is still like very visible. Like, you can still actually see a surprising amount despite it being in the middle of the night, which was obviously very deliberate. And especially like, cities on the back look absolutely fantastic. And then in the Wild Run, they just, I guess, just turned all the lights off. I don't know what happened here, dude. And apparently this is because they removed a lot of real light sources in the game and replaced it with these fake ones, which either apparently come in orange or in white blue. So this is also why if you're driving out at night, it never looks any different than these two, because they just added these like fake light vectors here and removed any of the actual real light sources in the game. But obviously most of that was actually just visual changes. I think now we're gonna slowly transition a little bit more into gameplay. And what we can see here is that in the original game, traffic cars could actually take damage. So this is obviously your car here, the spiker, and you just, like, the player just rammed this traffic car on the side. And you can see that there's like actual massive damage here on the side. And for whatever reason, traffic cars in Wild Run do not take damage anymore. They are completely invincible for whatever reason. Apparently, like, one thing that I always appreciated about the crew was just how much wildlife there actually was in the game. Well, it turns out there used to be way more, so you could, for example, have, like, small little squirrels running across the street here, or, you know, horses in the background. Those were also removed in Wild Run, for whatever reason. So moving on to gameplay, we can already start seeing some weird changes with the missions themselves. So one of the final missions of the game, there was actually what looks like 8 drivers in total for this race, which for whatever reason got removed to 5. This is really strange considering, like, obviously the game can clearly handle this. So I'm not sure why they reduced the opponents in a couple of the missions. Now, when we talk about gameplay, we also have to consider the sound and the audio of the game, because it does play a major role in how you perceive the gameplay. And also the sound has also been messed with in a weird way. So with Wild Run, they added a really loud and obnoxious wind sound effect that is basically playing throughout the entire time you're driving fast. So have a listen to this. Original game, you mainly just hear the car. And I'm moving on to Wild Run, you hear this? This is constant, like, wind blowing noise that's almost louder than the car itself. It makes the car itself just sound way less punchy. I feel like it has kind of like lost the punch a little bit. The game actually used to have unique traffic lights for each area in the game, which you can kind of see here. You know, you can have these with, like, I'm not sure what it's called, but like a roof over the lights here. Others don't, others are yellow. Some of them also are horizontal, like these here. And then in Wild Run, they, for whatever reason, just replaced every single unique asset of, like, all of the different looking traffic lights with the same exact one we see here. And the problem that this causes is that occasionally you'll find this where traffic lights are just floating in midair for some reason. Well, I know the reason is because the height of these is different, and this wasn't really taken into account when just mass replacing all of the assets. Now in Wild Run, they also changed the HUD. I already talked about this in my last video, and, like, overall we can obviously, like, discuss whether or not the old or the new HUD looks better. But I think what is hard to argue against is that the new HUD is just way harder to read. So if you are in a cockpit view and you have a dashboard console, like, next to, or like a console in the middle here, it basically becomes an almost unintelligible mess because the new minimap doesn't have any, like, background behind it, so it just kind of, like, blends with whatever you know, is usually in the cockpit here, and it becomes way harder to read. So here, for example, you have the same exact car, but this is with the original HUD, and it had this like black background, which made it always visible in the interior of the car. Now you might also wonder why sometimes the game looks like this and why it's kind of, like, hard to play the game during certain times of day, at least in the game. And it's actually because not only is there, like, a lot of wrong here with how this is supposed to look, like, obviously the ground should be way brighter considering the way the sky looks, but the reason why this happens, and the reason why you can see that lights are on here on the car, but they're not actually casting any lights, same with the street lights here, like, they're clearly turned on, but they're not casting actually any lights. It's because the actual light sources that they're supposed to cast, they all turn on at the same time, and they do it way too late, which means that at any time during, like, between, I think, like, around 10 to 11 p.m. and around, like, 3 a.m., all light sources just turn off. Like, all of it is off. So, like, if you're, like, during a time, like, let's say, for example, 4 a.m., where it's still, like, kind of dark out, everything is turned off, right? Everything is just completely turned off. Which is why you get weird looking scenes like this one, where you can see that the car is still supposed to be on, right? Like, the car and the traffic lights are, like, the model itself has lights that turn on, but the actual light sources don't actually get enabled along with them. Because back in the original game, everything was kind of like different, and some light sources were actually on all the time, like 24/7. But for whatever reason, every light source now has the same exact time schedule, so to say, which usually never ever matches up with the rest. Now here's a very, very clear example of how they actually messed with the car physics and the cars in general in this game. So if you position the car just right after the Wild Run update, you can get stuff like this to happen, where it looks like the tires are just kind of floating in midair. So what you have to understand about how this game works is that the wheels, what they look like visually, doesn't mean that this is how the wheels work on a physics level. So you can imagine that, you know, this is just like the visual wheel, but then there's like a physics wheel that is kind of invisible. And what they did is they made this physics wheel way wider, way more wide. Like this should extend way, way, way further, so that it actually like reaches the sidewalk here and is partially on it, which is why the car looks like it's kind of like levitating. This is also a big reason why the physics just feel kind of flat, and while the handling in general just feels kind of flat. It's because the actual tires, how they're being simulated, you know, through the physics model, are actually like twice as wide as they're supposed to be. And the extra annoying thing about this is that in the original game, cars actually had varying like widths of tires. So for example, some of these street cars, like the street tune cars, you know, had fairly like slimmer tires as compared to the race car versions, like the race tunes of all the cars, which used very wide slicks. And this actually resulted in the cars feeling different. Whereas after the Wild Run update, it honestly just kind of feels like every car feels the exact same on a handling perspective. It's just that they have varying levels of downforce. So the race cars have more downforce than the street cars. But it turns out that back in the original game, these cars used to feel very, like much more distinct. And it's partially because of these tires. Now, I can't really show any footage of this, but basically we're talking about the Wild Run a lot, like the Wild Run expansion, but it turns out the Calling All Units expansion also further broke the game. So early on, if you just start the game with the Calling All Units expansion installed, there is a Calling All Units prologue mission that if you do not complete it immediately as soon as you get it, most of the dialogue in the game will not actually trigger anymore. So usually in the game, between missions, characters would call you and just kind of like lead missions into one another and give you some background information that is important to know if you want to actually understand the full story. However, for some reason, until you actually complete this prologue mission, these phone calls never happen. Like, you will never ever be called. And I can absolutely imagine that some people just never did this prologue mission and just continued with the main story. And then were kind of disappointed with the story of the game because they weren't actually able to fully understand most of it. And it's because they actually they never received the phone calls. They never actually received any of the dialogue that was supposed to trigger because they skipped the prologue mission, which is insane. Now, if you've played the Crew Wild Run, you've probably seen this happen in one of the in-game cutscenes, which has become a bit of an iconic glitch, so to say, where the character just completely freaks out during the cutscene. And it turns out this is once again a problem that Wild Run introduced, and basically what they did with the Wild Run update, for whatever reason, is that the center of gravity, so to say, like the center of gravity of the car has been put way further up, like way above the roof. Which in that case works more of a center of mass, so to say. This, I feel like it's just a really weird way of how they try to make the handling quote-unquote better. Because you might ask, okay, well, if the center of mass or the center of gravity is this high up, why aren't the cars always flipping over? They actually do this in the cutscenes, but the reason why they don't do it in the gameplay is because with the Wild Run, they introduced this weird magnetism effect. Like, if you've ever done a jump that was kind of like awkward, or if you kind of missed a jump somewhere, you might remember that the cars just kind of like flatten out, like really forcibly. Like, they really forcibly try to, like, you know, while in midair, kind of like flatten out. They added this like artificial effect in the Wild Run update, kind of as a countermeasure for the like extremely high center of mass that they added. So the cars actually always want to flip over, and in fact they do in the cutscenes, because the cars typically always behave like this, or should always behave like this, like they do in the cutscenes. But it's just that this weird magnetism effect is kind of like keeping the cars on the ground forcibly. So every time you're steering, anytime you're driving in the game, it's basically the physics just kind of like fighting each other pretty much all the time, where like there's one force that's constantly trying to rip the car into like various directions every time you steer, and one force that's forcibly trying to keep the car flat and on the ground. And coupled with the wider tires that we already talked about that are way too wide, this is why the handling of the game feels so strange. Like why it feels so fake, why it feels like almost you're driving like a go-kart almost. It's because you have all of these like weird fake effects and physics basically fighting each other, just trying to keep the car on the ground. This is also why sometimes you might have also experienced the launch glitch where for whatever reason, if something hits you or you hit something, your car just gets flung way up into the sky. It's because all of these like weird forces, these fake forces constantly fighting each other, just at some point just give up and freak out. Now it goes without saying, but in the original game, every car had a specific, you know, unique center of gravity depending on what car it was, that was unique to each car, and none of these were ever like way up above the roof. They were like at the ground at a place where it makes sense. And this might be the reason why you didn't like the handling in the Crew. It's not because it was actually bad. There was actually a lot going on under the hood and everything was actually supposed to work like it should. But it's with this Wild Run update, they added all of these weird fake physics, fake forces, fake effects on top of it that just made the handling in the Crew feel extremely artificial. In fact, there are mods out there at the moment that at least somewhat in some parts kind of like bring back the original physics in like small ways. And I tried some of them out and the game already feels much better. In fact, I will make an entirely dedicated video on the Crew Unlimited mods. So if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe. But I will probably just wait until more mods are out until I make a complete coverage on this. Yeah, I've been yapping for an hour here on the recording. I'm not sure how long the entire video is gonna be, but I'd imagine pretty long. This should cover most of the major stuff when it comes to the Crew Wild Run and how the game became worse over time. Once again, there's a lot of stuff that I missed out on, like a lot of stuff that I just skipped because I figured it's just like, you know, a little bit more minor compared to the other stuff. So if you want to know more, if you want to see more atrocities, I highly encourage you to check out the Discord server. Link is in the description below. And once again, thanks to Whammy for actually documenting all of this. So yeah, overall, I gotta be honest, this was shocking to experience and learn, especially because, you know, I would assume many of you and, you know, many people in general, we all just kind of assumed that the Wild Run was an upgrade. Like, this was marketed as an upgrade, and people also just kind of like talked about like, oh yeah, the Crew is so much better now, when it turns out it really wasn't. It was not better at all. And I hope this video kind of helps to just kind of like bring back the truth a little bit and just kind of like steer things right in a way and just kind of like show people that we were actually robbed of what was initially a much better experience. But yeah, that's all for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, take care, take it easy, and as always, peace. See you guys.